Hello and welcome to Heart with Abagaba, the podcast where we celebrate the love, laughter, and little moments that make families shine. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, educator, or simply someone who believes in the magic of childhood, this is your place. Every week, we share real stories, inspiring voices, and joyful conversations that warm the heart and lift the spirit. So grab a cozy seat. It's time to go to Heart to Heart. Stop Smart sponsors Heart to Heart with Abagaba, your one stop destination for stuffing and not medical concierge services for adults, teens, and children. For more information, visit www.staff-smart.org or call 480-875-6871. Welcome back to Heart with Abagaba. Today, we are talking about something that weighs on the hearts of many parents: how to raise children with hope and purpose in a world facing a climate crisis. Our guest, Bridget Shirvell, is a journalist and the author of Parenting in a Climate Crisis. This powerful book explores what it means to nurture children in an era of environmental uncertainty and social change. Bridget's work has been featured in publications like Teen Vogue, Fast Company, and Martha Stewart Living, where she blends thoughtful personal insights with deep reporting on the intersections of family, climate, and justice. If you've ever wondered how to talk to your children about the planet or how to model courage and care in the face of significant global issues, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Bridget, I'm conversing with you from Mesa, Arizona. Please tell our listeners where we are connecting from and add a short bio.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me to start off with. I appreciate taking the time and getting to meet you. I am in Mystic, Connecticut. This is the place that I grew up in, then was away for a little bit, and now I am excited to be back and raising my own child here. Um, so a little bit about me. I am an environmental journalist, and I focus a lot on lifestyle reporting within that. So more like how are we going to live and what are the everyday actions that the climate is affecting and what can people do instead of if you think about more like science heavy reporting, that's not as much of what I do.
Thank you so very much for adding the bio. I'm so pleased and excited to talk to you. I can hardly wait. So, how can we talk to children about the climate crisis?
I think that is a question that weighs on the minds of a lot of parents and educators. And I think it first of all really depends on your location and also how old your kids are. But I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that it's not like a big one and done conversation. It doesn't need to be a long, serious discussion. You can really weave it into everyday actions and the things that you are doing. So, for instance, with younger kids, I think it's really about starting to set that foundation for an appreciation and love of nature and also just respect for the natural world, right? So the same way you would teach, your 2 or 3 year old to pick up their toys, you also want to like make sure that they're like picking up their trash when they're
Mhm.
outside, if they're having a picnic or something like that. And those sort of like baseline things are going to set the foundation for longer conversations about how we take care of the planet and also why we need to. And then, as kids get like a little older, once they're into elementary school, they can probably start to understand the larger concepts and they've also noticed things around them. My child who is 6 noticed pretty early on that our car, which is electric, is quieter than other cars she'd been in. So that was a conversation that we could have of like, wow, there are different types of like fuels that make cars go and how some of them are better for the planet. And then, that leads to questions about, well, like what do those fuels do to the planet? So you can kind of like very slowly start to set those conversations as like you're just doing everyday things. I think the older your kids get and the more they're kind of already aware of what is happening is really when you have to let them lead, with preteens and teenagers. I think you have to check in, especially depending if they're on social media and when there's different sorts of weather events happening that might be scary. You want to check in and understand what they're hearing and what questions they have, and just kind of give them a space to like ask their own questions and also be kind of angry. I think a lot of them are angry with adults, and I think they have every right to be.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to kind of make space for those emotions.
That is so helpful. And speaking of children, conversations, and the climate, have you found that children are more capable of handling these conversations than we sometimes assume? Thank you for sharing about your child. I mean, that's so wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, kids are kind of naturally curious, right? And I
Hmm.
think they also have, the younger they are, they very much have a sense of right and wrong.
Hmm.
So, in a lot of ways, I think it's easier to talk about these issues with them than maybe it is with, your grown-up neighbors or your
Uh-huh.
family members who are adults. Because yeah, they just kind of they're already noticing the things that are happening around the world, and
Hmm.
it's just kind of like, well, of course, like if that's bad for, the animals, why would we keep doing it? We should do something else.
Right.
It's not complicated for them.
Hmm. That is so insightful. How can parents process their own eco anxiety while still showing up for their children?
Yeah, I think this can be really tricky, especially depending on what is happening in the world.
Hmm.
I have friends who LA was really a second home to them. And even though they weren't still living there when the fire's happening this year, that was really hard for them, like harder
Hmm.
than, I mean, I found it hard too to watch, but I
Yeah.
think it's like very hard when you have that personal connection to it.
Hmm.
And so I think something that worked for some of them was really letting like either their partner or another family member kind of have the conversations about explaining what was happening so that
Hmm.
they didn't necessarily have to be until they've kind of had a chance to think through their own emotions. But
Hmm.
I think it can just be like you have to figure out what outlets work for you. Like
Hmm.
for me personally, if I'm starting to feel really like anxious about the world, I actually try to spend more time outside because I
Hmm.
find that spending time away from screens and just
Hmm.
being outside in nature really makes me feel better.
Hmm. The great outdoors are amazing, isn't it? Oh. So I imagine there's tension between being honest and not overwhelming our kids. How do you personally navigate that balance in your own family? You mentioned going outdoors, but do you have any more insight?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, most parents know their kids best, and every kid is capable of handling different things at different ages. That's just kind of the way it works. My own child is like very, very sensitive to animals, right? She loves
Mhm.
animals, as do a lot of like younger children.
Mhm.
So anytime I'm talking about like anything, like for instance, when she was aware of what was happening with like the LA wildfires, she wanted to know immediately about the animals.
Oh.
And she wanted to know if they were all safe, right? And that is like I can't tell her that they are
Mhm.
all safe because I
Mhm.
don't know, and it's probably wouldn't be true.
Yeah.
So instead, I said, I'm not sure, but there's lots of people that are working to try to make as many animals safe as they can. And there luckily were a ton of news stories about that, which was great to see. And so I was able to show her some
Mhm.
images of, for instance, firefighters who had saved dogs. So that was
Oh.
something that she was able to see. And I think
Mhm.
that is something that with my own child and even with myself, I try to go back to of there are so many people that are trying in so many different ways to fix environmental problems. And
Mhm.
that is something that always gives me a lot of hope, and that I found really hopeful when I was writing my book and, talking to all these different people in the book, just about like the things that they did in their own lives.
Hmm. That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. What are your tips for breaking up with fast fashion?
Oh, yeah. So this one is so hard, especially with kids, right? Because they grow so quickly and you like obviously want to just not spend a ton of money on that. It took me a lot of time, but I would say in this past year, I've probably built into the habit where I look for used clothing first for my own child,
I love it. Hmm.
and I've gotten in the habit of like asking friends with older kids, if they have anything or if they would mind like saving something for me. And that can be a little like uncomfortable at first, but like once you start to do it, you realize that, oh, hey, like lots of people have these items and don't know what to do with them and don't
Oh yeah.
necessarily want to throw them away. And they're more than happy to like pass them on. And now, like I do the same. I have a few friends in the area with like younger kids, and I'm always happy to kind of set. I have a pile right now on my dresser of a dress this week that I realized my kid was had outgrown, and so there's a pile on my dresser of things that are going to be like handed down.
Hmm.
Um, in my own, I have found it easier in my own for myself to get rid of kind of fast fashion just because
Hmm.
I don't need to buy as many clothes
Oh
as
yeah.
my child does. Not that I don't like to, but
Hmm.
so again, I try to buy like used when I can. I try
Hmm.
to pay attention to like what materials are made out of. So I'm
Hmm.
looking for things that are like cotton or
Hmm.
wool or linen, more like natural materials to begin with. And I think that is also just a good start.
I love that. And for parents with growing children who need new clothes often, do you have some creative or budget-friendly ways to stay
Yeah, I mean,
aligned
I've
with those
I've
values?
noticed like a lot of companies that you think of as kind of like mid-range children's clothing, but also tend to have less like fast fashion, like say Hannah Anderson.
Mhm.
They have
Oh,
like
I
a
love. Mhm.
yeah, they have a like pre-loved section on their website now, which is great because then you can shop those things for them as well. I think it's also thinking about like how much stuff does my child really need, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Hmm.
so easy to want to buy all of these like things or be like, "Oh, my kid needs oh, it was Spirit Week at school at my kid's school this week, right?" And so
Hmm.
she was supposed to wear yellow every day, but like a different yellow piece of clothing, and
Uh-huh.
I didn't buy a single new thing for that. I was just kind
I
of like,
love
all right,
it.
you need a yellow hat. Like I have a yellow adult hat. Like that's what you're gonna make work.
Yay.
You need
Awesome.
a yellow accessory. We tied a dog bandana that was yellow in her
I
hair. Like you
love it.
have more things than you need.
I love that because then you're also modeling how to reuse, recycle. Like it's just teaching her a lot. Like we don't have to just go
Right.
and buy anything. We can just reuse what we have. I just love that. That totally
Yeah.
resonates with me.
Yeah, it's great. Like it's just like a great problem solving skill for kids too. And plus,
Oh
like the
yeah.
older they get, you can kind of give the list to them and be like, all right, like figure out like what we
Hmm.
have around the house that will work for this.
I just love that. Oh my goodness. How did you come to focus on parenting within the context of the climate crisis?
Sure. So I got my start as a food reporter, but not really like restaurants, more food systems. So like I spent a lot of time talking to farmers and
Mhm.
chefs. And as part of that, I think I really started to see or to understand the impacts of what the climate crisis was going to be on our food system about like not being able to get certain ingredients or growing seasons changing. And so that was my focus for a long time. And then after I had my child, I started to ask the same like farmers and chefs I was interviewing for stories about their own kids, right? About like what they did, like what
Uh-huh.
skills they thought they needed, what they ate. And so that's really when I started to focus on parenting and the environment. And I think at the time there was starting to be more information about how we talk to kids about the climate crisis, but there wasn't a ton of information out there about like, well, how do we live and how do we raise kids? So I had pitched a story to Good Housekeeping magazine that they ran in 2019, which was kind of this idea of, can I climate proof my child? Like, what does that look like? And at the time, I was focused very much on kind of like survivalist skills, right? Like, does she
Mhm.
need to learn how to can her own food? Should she know how to sew? Like, all of those types of
Oh,
things.
I love that. Mhm.
But when I was talking to climatologists and some child psychologists, they really focused on what we think more of like softer skills, I guess, of kind of
Mm.
problem solving and flexibility and curiosity and all these things to kind of build overall resilience so that like your child can thrive in whatever scenario that they're
Mhm.
gonna end up in. So that really became kind of like the jumping off point for the book.
Ooh, I love that. How has becoming a parent shaped your views on climate change? And I know we touched on that a little bit, but any more insights will be amazing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that for myself, it's been interesting because in a lot of ways, having a child has made me reconnect with nature even more and be more
Mhm.
committed to protecting it, right? Just because, especially when you have a young kid, you're outside with them a lot, like they're immediately awed by all the nature happening around them. And then you kind of get to be a kid again, right? You're kind of
I
like, oh
love
yeah,
it.
like jumping in puddles is so fun. Um, yeah. And so that was kind of like one side of it. And then I guess the other part of it for me is, I mean, it's you feel differently, of course, when you have a kid and you're kind of
Hmm.
thinking about what their future is going to look like
Hmm.
decades from now. And so I think that can be scary and very challenging. And I was very anxious about it for a long time. And I think now I'm kind of more in a place where there's a lot of things I can't control, right? I can't
Yeah,
make governments act or businesses change, but I can kind of create joy for my child and for myself and really like focus on that.
I love how you mentioned that you can create joy. That word, Joy, I love it. You are so good. I'm loving this conversation, like
Thank you.
so much more. So, how can families reduce their carbon footprints without falling into guilt or perfectionism?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that you have to realize is that you're not going to do it right 100% of the time, and that's okay. Like just thinking about it, just asking that question of like, how can I reduce my carbon footprint is you're
Hmm.
doing something great just by doing that. I think it really, for most families, I would say the easiest and most meaningful way to probably reduce your carbon footprint is going to be in your kitchen, right? It's the types of food you eat and how much food you're wasting. We waste a lot
Hmm.
of food in
We
the
do,
US
yeah.
and yeah, and that, you know, that food is that if you're not composting, it's ending up in a landfill and it's emitting methane gas as it rots. And so that is a very potent greenhouse gas. So I think, you know, just kind of thinking through, oh, what am I like wasting? In the book, I talk a little bit about doing a food waste audit, which can be kind of a fun activity with kids, right? Like get them
Hmm.
some gloves, go through your trash and be like, oh, what did we throw away this week? And like, how can we do that better next week? Can be kind of like a fun activity. And then, you know, there are other like things. The less like meat and dairy you eat, obviously, is going to lower your carbon footprint. I wouldn't suggest to anyone that they have to become a vegetarian or a vegan, although if you want to be, I think that's great. But, you know, you can just think about things like, oh, can I, you know, eat plant-based meals, whatever, more times a week than I currently am eating. And so that can be, that's a big way for most families to lower their carbon footprint. And then like the fast fashion, like we were talking about before, like that is another way to really think it through. And I think the other thing that's just like important to keep in mind is the phase of parenthood that you're in right now. When my child was very young, we lived very close to my sister, and so she had never gone more than 2 weeks without seeing my sister. And then my sister got a job in Texas, and all of a sudden she was farther away, right? And I, as environmentalists, try not to fly that often, but those 2 years that my sister lived hundreds of miles away from us, like I got on the flight and, I got on the plane and we flew to Texas to see her because it was important to me that my child have that relationship. And that was just like the stage of life that we were in. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. Or like I have friends who would ask me, oh, should I use like reusable diapers or throwaway diapers? And I'm like, the over under of like how long your kid is going to use them, like just do what works for you, like do what's going to
Right.
get you through that. And really, like the cloth diapers might not be so great if you're living someplace where there's a drought, right? And you have to do all that
Yeah.
laundry all the time. So
Yeah.
there's so
Yeah.
many factors. Yeah, I think you just have to pay attention to where you are in your life too.
Mhm. I will have to agree on that. And I love how you mentioned about the food waste is happens in our kitchen. I had not thought of this. And now that gives me really good food for thought. I'm gonna be mindful of the my food waste in my beginning with my kitchen. And I love that permission to let go of perfection feels so freeing. Are there first small steps you recommend that add up over time?
Yeah, one of the so I didn't actually like this advice, I admit, when I was doing the research for my book, but it kind of people kept saying it, and I do think it is important, is that we need to talk about the climate crisis more.
Yeah.
Not from like a scientific point of view, but talk about like how you feel about it with your
Mhm.
neighbors and other parents at your kids' school. Can be something as simple, right, as like, oh, I'm really trying to reduce my food waste because I'm concerned about the climate. Like, do you have any tips for that? Or how do you feel? Like, it's very much just making it part of our everyday conversations. And I think that can it builds community. You're also going to find people who feel the same way as you and might not feel as alone. But eventually it will drive more systematic action the more people are talking about it and kind of talking about solutions.
Mhm. What's one piece of advice you would give to a new parent feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world?
Um, I would say, turn off your social media. And get outside, take
Mhm.
a walk with your kid,
Oh, yeah.
and really like enjoy the world. I think you'll find more ways to protect it that way, but you'll also just
Hmm.
like feel better.
Oh, I love that. And I think that will resonate. Sometimes the most powerful thing is knowing we're not alone in these feelings,
Yes.
right? Love
Right.
that. Yay. What gives you hope about the next generation?
Um, I think that's just like how aware they are of what's happening, how committed they are to doing better. I talked to some teenagers for my book. I've done a lot of reporting on teens and the climate crisis. And even right now, right, with the current state of US politics, there's still a lot of climate conferences that are happening around the country that are
Mhm.
being put on by teenagers who are
Ooh.
focusing on like what they can do in their everyday life. And I think that's very inspiring and gives me a lot of hope.
That is beautiful and inspiring. Have you seen any specific movements of youth? Well, you just said that. So let's move on to how can parents balance personal lifestyle changes with the need for systemic action?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, this is why I like when people talking about it because then you'll start to learn like who are the people in your own community that you can kind of count on. And so maybe it's something like, okay, you've been committed to reducing your food waste at home. Can you help your kids' school? Like, are there other parents that you've been talking to who would be interested in helping to get composting at your kids' school? Or in my book, I talked to a lot of teenagers who had kind of taken the steps to get solar panels on their schools. And those were kind of things that started as individual actions that kind of ended up building community and driving more systematic change.
That's wonderful. So it's not either or, but a both and. I love that.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think that in recent years, there's been in environmental circles, there's kind of been this divide of like, we have to do one or the other, right? We have to do
Hmm.
individual actions or we have to focus on systematic change. And I
Uh-huh.
don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they can jump off of one another and kind of build on each other.
That makes so much sense. How can families engage in that bigger picture, even if they're new to advocacy?
So, one of a great way to kind of just start engaging is, contact your local congressman and say, and your senators and say, hey, I'm really concerned about the
Hmm.
environment. What are you doing? What bills are priorities for you in the environmental sphere? And the more they kind of hear that, the more they're going to be forced to take action. So, I think that's a really great way for people to start.
I love that. That's a great way to start. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what does sustainable or climate conscious parenting look like in everyday life?
So for me, it's kind of thinking about, I guess I'm going to put it in the terms that I use with my child, right? She's at the age now where she sees other kids have something at school and she like wants it. And before we buy anything, I try to ask her, I'm like, well, do we know how this thing was made? Is it going to be good for us? Is it good for the people who made it? Is it good for the planet? And sometimes we don't know all the answers. Sometimes, the answers are going to be a little split, but I try that the goodness is going to outweigh the bad whenever we do something. And so that's kind of how I think about climate conscious parenting of like, you're not going to be able to do it 100% right all the time. That's just the way our system is set up. But we're thinking about it and trying to figure out the things that have the lowest amount of harm.
I love the idea of integrating values into the rhythm of daily life. I love it. Are there any rituals or routines that help you stay grounded in your own home?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time, not even a lot of time, but we try to spend time outside every day, even if it's just like a 5 minute like walk around the backyard to see like what's happening or
Mhm.
like a walk down the street. And I think spending that time in nature is kind of like a way for me to connect with my child, but also the wider like world.
I just love that. I want to hear about your book. What inspired you to write it? I don't know if we touch about that, but I'm just really thinking, and I just think it's such a wonderful, like a much needed idea. Like it's
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I was already in this kind of like environmental writing world, but I really started thinking about it during the early days of the COVID pandemic.
Mhm.
My kid was about 2 at that time, and we had this like big old dogwood tree in our front yard that she was kind of like obsessed with, right? And it was like something we could say hello to and goodbye to on the morning walks, and she could touch. And then after like a couple of months, I noticed that the tree wasn't doing so well, right? It just like the
Oh,
bark was flying off. It just like didn't look that well.
oh,
Um, and I spent probably like most of that summer of 2020 like talking to every like tree person I could find, being like, how do I save this tree? And they kept telling me, oh, like this tree is super old. It's 100 plus years old. Dogwood trees don't live that long in this part of the world anymore because they get like diseases. They're like, it's really just at the end of its life. But this has been a tree that has been really, really resilient. So that made me just kind of start thinking about this idea of resilience and like how can parents help foster resilience. And the climate crisis is one of the biggest challenges that kids today are going to face. So like what does it mean to be climate resilient? And so that was really kind of the inspiration for the book. But it started with the tree that is no longer in my yard. We did plant a new tree when we had to have it cut down. But yeah.
oh. I just love that. And that was such a grounding and eye-opening conversation with Bridget Shirvell. What I appreciate most is how she invites us to parent not from a place of fear, but from a place of connection, empowerment, and love. Her book, Parenting in a Climate Crisis, is an essential guide for families who want to raise children with both awareness and hope. We'll include them in my show notes about her work, her writing, and resources. Let's keep showing out for our children and the world. one small loving choice at a time. Bridget, do you have any final thoughts, social media handles, your website, where we can find your book?
Yeah, I mean,
Drop all of them.
thank you so much for having me on. My website is breeshirvell.com, and that has links to where you can buy the book, my social media, my newsletter. So that's a great resource.
Oh, Bridget, thank you so much for sharing your heart and wisdom and love for the environment with us today on Heart to Heart with Abagaba. Have a beautiful day. And dear listeners, my takeaway from today is we don't need to have all the answers. We just need to show our children what it looks like to care, to act, and to hope, even when things feel uncertain. Until next time, this is Abby Dominguez from Heart to Heart with Abagaba. Aspire Behavior Health also sponsors Heart to Heart with Abagaba. They offer monitoring, counseling, medication, and personal care services in a beautiful residential setting. Contact Aspire CBH at outlook.com or call 480-875-6871. Thank you for joining us for another heart to heart moment. I hope today's story touched your heart the way it touched mine. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe to this and our YouTube channel so you never miss a moment of connection, inspiration, and joy. The stories and insights shared on Heart to Heart with Abagaba are personal and based on lived experiences. While some of our guests may be licensed professionals in their fields, the content of this podcast should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. For expert guidance, please consult a qualified professional directly. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and keep celebrating the love that makes us family. Celebrate!